안녕하세요. 2021 서울
Hello everyone.
아트마켓 넥스트 모빌리티 세션
Welcome to
모더레이터를
2021 PAMS. My name is Hyewon Lee. I'm Renee Hyewon Lee from Gioi Immersive Storytelling Studio. I'm a moderator. Welcome everyone. We are joined by Sarah Ellis, Director of Digital Development at Royal Shakespeare Company. We already have heard about the performance Dream, and we're going to hear more about the future of theater. Dream, in the earlier half of this year, was in Manchester International Festival, and there was also cooperation with orchestra. RSC cooperated with many others to engage in creative experiment. Gaming, motion capture, and other technologies were utilized. Also, it distinguished interactive tickets from viewing tickets and an attempt to explore the future of the performance. In The Tempest, a lot of technologies in film were also used. Three-dimensional world was transferred to actual stage. RSC has engaged in many projects led by Sarah Ellis, and we are joined by Sarah Ellis. We're going to hear more about definition of theater for the future audience, and we're going to also hear about collaborative processes and insights. Let me introduce Sarah in more detail. Sarah is Director of Digital Development at Royal Shakespeare Company. She has been leading major projects in RSC. She is also she was in latest partnership for the RSC, the Audience of the Future Live Performance Demonstrator Dream, funded by UKRI. She has made a lot of speeches and presentations on the topics of arts and technologies. She received numerous awards as well. In 2013, she was listed in the 100 most influential people working in gaming and technology by the Hospital Club and Guardian Culture. She's also an industry champion in the UK, and in today's 60-minute session, we're going to hear more about the projects from Sarah. Let's welcome her with a big round of applause. Sarah, the floor is now yours.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here, and thanks for such a wonderful introduction. I'm going to share our work at the RSC and how we've looked at and approached new technologies coming into the theatre making industry. I'm sitting in my home today, but behind me is a digital scan of our theatre, and this is fully, we've managed to capture the entire theatre, and we are able to place it in a games engine. And these are the technologies that we'll be talking about today. Before I start my presentation, I'd like to share with you a video of a collaboration we did back in 2016, which is quite an important collaboration for us as a company because it was the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death. And in that year, we, for the first time, brought in a technology partner to collaborate with on our main production, on our main stage. And it was quite a pivotal moment for us. So if it's all right with you, I'd like to hand over to our technical team to share this video. And then for the next hour, I will share with you how we made that collaboration and why this space is really exciting for us. Over to you.
3 years ago, we spotted that 2016 was going to be a big Shakespeare year. It was Shakespeare's 400th anniversary of his death, and the Royal Shakespeare Company needed to put on something pretty spectacular. We needed to try and match the magic of Shakespeare's imagination.
I got cast a long time ago for this new production of The Tempest, and the RSC is the home of Shakespeare. Not many actors get the chance to do things like this.
It's taken the best part of 2 years for us to develop this technology with Intel and create an avatar to make Ariel fly, to create a sense of the island being a place where magic was possible.
I boarded the King's ship. You get to see two fully fledged performances, one of which is an actor and another is this apparition can fly around the space.
To dive into the fire, to ride.
We have unlimited versions of Ariel. We're able to change his form in many different ways.
We are creating for the first time on stage, real-time, live facial performance capture, and that is quite an extraordinary leap forward.
I and my fellows are ministers of fate.
The actor both becomes the marionette and the puppeteer at the same time, and you can see their physicality completely driving one-to-one this digital character.
Men hang and drown.
We keep working, keep trying to refine the way that Ariel moves, the way he talks, and I have no idea where it's going to go.
The technology that Intel deployed here for the Tempest is big. Take real-time information from a motion capture suit, map that on to a complex digital avatar, and then project that digital avatar out through 27 projectors.
We have their desktop i7s to take marks, skeletal information, and a machine called the Big Beast, which has 120 cores. I've never seen a technical setup like this. This place is full of huge amounts of technology, much more so than most film sets that we're on. Generally, on set, you might say, let's fix that in post. You can't do that here. The avatar has to be so robust because that's the final product.
All you can do is create the play with the tools that you have now. And what's delightful about this production is that we have pretty spectacular tools.
What the technology affords us is the ability to encapsulate Shakespeare's vision, inclusive of all that magic, that wonder.
The possibilities of what Intel have allowed are only limited by our imaginations.
We're at the forefront of something that other people can take on and build. Who knows where things will be taken in the future?
It's for other creative minds to see what we're doing and take it further.
Thank you. And I hopefully, sharing the work gives you a little insight into what we'll be talking about today. So I'm going to go straight into the presentation. And to quote another UK cultural icon, David Bowie, tomorrow belongs to those who see it coming. My role is the first role within the Royal Shakespeare Company, which is the Director of Digital Development. And it's come through an inquiry and a need for us to look at the future and the future of theatre and think about the future of theatre and all the new technologies that are happening in the 21st century and how they build a theatre making toolkit. Because effectively, theatre's always had a relationship with technology. We have always innovated. If you look at Shakespeare's plays from 400 years ago, you will see beautiful craft and innovation documented in the performance of his plays. But we wouldn't have been able to still have his plays had it not been for innovation, technology innovation, and that is the printing press. And the printing press allowed us to document and keep his plays for us to be able to basically allow us to keep those plays going and for them to be interpreted again and again and again over centuries. And what's interesting about the plays is how that they resonate and how that they keep a relevance to now. And at the RSC, we look at those plays for now and what those plays say to us now. And that's a really important thing when we think about the directors that we work with and the audiences that we want to connect with. So this is our home, and this is the Royal Shakespeare Theatre in Stratford-upon-Avon. And it's every night, up till very recently in the pandemic, about 1,000 people come here to have a shared experience. And with that shared experience, this is a bunch of strangers that come together, not knowing each other, but are together for the performance that are on these stages. And we often talk about technology making things better, but it's really interesting to think about that there is really nothing I've found better in terms of a real-time storytelling technology than the live actor. And so we celebrate that liveness, we celebrate that real-timeness, we celebrate that connectedness in these spaces. And for centuries, people have come together like this. This isn't something that's new. We're really used to coming together in concert halls, music halls, theatres, cinemas all around the world. And we do things like rituals, and we do things that we don't realise that we do that are rituals around these spaces. And part of that is over periods of time that these stages have not just been places to watch performances, but they've been places where business has been done, socializing has been done, flirting has been done, food, entertainment, all of those sorts of things that have happened in these collective spaces that we call theatres. But the rituals are really interesting because if you're looking at new forms of theatre, if you're looking at how you progress that, then we often don't think about the audience ritual in order to experience it. And some of the things I'll be talking about this morning or this evening for you is about that. So that's something to think about when we're examining this. But also for us to not forget that the most recent impacts are that we haven't been able to be in our theatres for nearly 2 years now. We'll be opening up our stages in November and we'll be welcoming audiences back. But in that time over the past 2 years where we haven't been able to open our theatres, we as a community have found ways to connect with audiences around the world remotely and look at the promise of theatre and look at how we can create theatre on multiple stages. And I think that is one of the major things for us to think about in this generation is all the world is a stage, and how we look at all those stages and how Shakespeare's work can be performed. So the video that you saw at the beginning was The Tempest, and it was a performance we did back in 2016, which in technology years feels a really long time ago, but actually it was such a seminal moment for us. And I wanted to start with that performance because that was a moment where our artistic director, Greg Doran, back in 2013, was thinking about the programme for the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death. And we were looking at the whole year, and he wanted to do The Tempest, which is Shakespeare's last play, arguably one of his most magical and innovative plays. And within that play, there is a scene called a mask. And the mask scene happens in the play, and it's always a problematic scene. But in Shakespeare's day, masks were seen as spectacles of innovation and mostly design-led, where designers were using the most up-to-date tools that they could possibly do to create these spectacles for audiences, often quite opulent. And we have documentation from the days of Shakespeare and his contemporaries where we have technologies were used immersively, innovatively. For example, there are documents where audiences were asked to wear mirrors and jewels so that candlelight could reflect off them. And it's if we think about that as an immersive technology, it's not that different to wearables, and it's not that different to how we are thinking about the virtual reality space or the augmented reality space. We also have documentation where roses were growing up at vines at the side of the theatre, and then they wafted the smell in. Again, forms of immersion and audience experience that we often think that the innovation happens now. We often think that the generation we're in are the most interesting around innovation. But I genuinely believe that we stand on the shoulders of giants, of people that have innovated before us. And to think about the future, we have to also think about our past and our present. And in that, when we think about that, and when we sit with those people that have innovated and we listen to what they have explored, we find more connection than we do a disconnection. So it's really important for us to think about that when we innovate in our theatre. So this is Mark Courtley, who performed as Ariel in The Tempest. And as you can see, his costume, we created a costume, but how we decided to work with Intel was Greg gave us the challenge of what would a digital mask look like? And what would a 21st century digital spectacle look like? And I was on the internet and I saw a 2-minute YouTube clip of an Intel keynote at the Consumer Electronics Summit. And they created this presentation of a whale and they had it on a screen. And then suddenly that whale came up across everyone's heads. And it was a form of augmented reality. And I sent that to Greg and he said, I want one, let's connect. So we reached out to Intel and we invited them into Stratford-upon-Avon and talked about how we might be able to explore what we were looking at and what we wanted to do around the anniversary of Shakespeare's death. And it was actually an engineer that said to us, do you know we have enough real-time processing power now to render a digital avatar in real time? And in that, we effectively didn't quite know what he meant by that and what that was about. And so what we did was we asked him again, what does that mean? What's that about? And he said, well, we have enough processing power for us to power real-time digital avatars. And we went, oh, okay, you mean puppetry? That's really interesting around theatre. And that was the start of bringing the character of Ariel alive, played by Mark Courtley. And so we started to look at motion capture and we started to look at the game engine technology to create those digital avatars. And within that, the suit that you're seeing now, the costume that you're seeing, there are sensors all over Mark's suit that are capturing him through a Wi-Fi network and channeling a digital avatar into a game engine and projected out through 27 projectors onto our theatre space. And here you can see Simon Russell Beale performing as Prospero. And this gives you a sense of the scale that we were working at and the decision makings that we created around why a digital avatar on stage. How did that connect to the live actor's performance? And it was really based on the principles of puppetry that we worked with. And here you can see Mark is in his real size, and then his digital avatar size is much higher and much greater. And this scene in the play is where Prospero is reminding Ariel of the power that he has over him, and that Ariel is scared and fearful of this moment. And we can feel him caught in a cloven pine, and you can feel that the forest is surrounding Ariel in that fear. And then he goes. And so the avatar didn't appear at all the time that Mark was performing, but we made choices around Shakespeare's text to validate his presence and what he was doing there. And that was all connected to how Ariel was feeling, whether he was being mischievous, whether he was being playful in the play, looking at being unseen, moments of music. And that's how we adopted, how we looked at how we approached his character. And in that, for the first time, we brought in a technology partner, not as a sponsor, but as a collaborator, as a partner to explore this together. And that on our main stage, we could add new tools and technologies to our theatre making toolkit that converged with traditional craft, that looked at costume making, that looked at the automation, that looked at the show control, and how that game engine technology connected to our traditional lighting and sound systems, alongside the huge wealth of experience that we have as a theatre company, but also generous enough to welcome new practitioners that from different industries, and looking at cross-industry collaboration for us to provide something new and different to our audiences, and for us to build a wider toolkit for us to work with creatives in the future. So this campaign also needed for us to think differently about how we approached our audiences. And we didn't just want you to come to the theatre, we wanted you to come to Prospero's Island, the island in the play that the play is performed on and based on, and how we could make you feel more connected outside of the theatre and build some more anticipation. So we created a campaign for the Tempest that was based on putting live real life holiday campaigns out, and thought about you coming to Prospero's Island and not just the theatre. And it was a start for us to think not only about our audiences in the theatre that were coming every night and 1,000 people came together, but what would be the potential of bringing together people virtually. So in the performance of The Tempest, for one day only, we created a Snapchat filter where you could become Ariel, your face could become Ariel, and you could play with that. And what we were trying to do there is experiment with how we could be really creative with our audiences, and not just look at our audiences in terms of consumers, but audiences in terms of community and part of the experience. And as I said before, we are working with audiences of about 1,000 people at night in the evening that come to our theatre, who effectively have this beautiful immersed often 3-hour experience of a play. But what about all of those people around the world who can't come and see us, that might want to connect with us differently, but their attention might be different too, that it might not be a 3-hour play that you connect with on us. But if we think about our phones and we think about all of the devices that we have as storytelling devices, what can we do? So we did the Snapchat filter for one day only, and in the run of The Tempest. And in that day, UK only, we reached 7.5 million people. And that was a starting point for us to think about the potential of not only the stage that we had in Stratford-upon-Avon, but the multiple stages that might be available to us to connect with audiences globally. And the question that we keep coming back to at the RSC, and it's a continual question that I think is with us for quite some time, which is how can we connect with people with all of this technology in their pocket, in their homes, and how do we find meaningful connections, theatrical live performance connections with our audiences that may never come to visit us in Stratford-upon-Avon, but are part of the Royal Shakespeare Company community, that are with us, want to engage with us, have a vested interest. And what are those forms of content that connect with our audiences in all of those places? And how do we compete with those other aspects of content that are on those devices, that we come through that and provide meaning, and what is our purpose as a company? And that brought forward the collaboration and the last project that we've been working on at the RSC, which is Audience of the Future, funded by Innovate UK. This was an industrial strategy challenge fund looking at the future of 4 key strands: live performance, screens, sports, and visitor attractions, funded by the business and innovation aspect of the government. And we were there to explore the future of live performance using immersive technology. So we'd already used some immersive technology within The Tempest back in 2016, and we'd done that on our own. And this time, what we wanted to do was not just think about ourselves as one organisation exploring this, but what would a whole community and sector look like? So we invited our friends at Punch Drunk, the Philharmonic Orchestra, Manchester International Festival, and the Digital Studio Marshmallow Laser Feast, for us to all look at the future of live performance, but not just from one perspective, but multiple ways of how different organisations, different arts venues or arts communities explored that through different forms. So not just theatre, but orchestral music, festivals, immersive theatre, and also the new digital emergent work. And the Audience of the Future Consortium was born. And not just looking at one form of technology, but multiple technologies. Not just looking at one answer to go, the future is virtual reality or the future is augmented reality, but the future is diverse, the future is inclusive, the future is about multiple ways that you can connect. And on this piece of work as well, what we wanted to do was invite research partners that could help ask big questions around our audiences and what we wanted to achieve, and help us imagine the future and use that research to make better decisions for us going forward. Each company did its own project. They kept their own IP on it. And we were able to create a really broad platform of research and development that allows us to share those learnings with our peers in the arts and culture sector, but also more globally what we found. And one of the key deliverables of that piece of work is Dream. Dream was performed back in March this year online. Dream is inspired by Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare's play, and was due to be performed in Stratford-upon-Avon in 2020, but due to the pandemic wasn't able to happen. And in that moment, we had to completely pivot and change what we were going to do with this performance. And we had to innovate and work with our partners to imagine a performance not in person, but a performance that was live online. And I'm going to talk you through how we made that and what we did and what we found, and the profound learnings of how the pandemic has been an opportunity for us to completely rethink our connection with audiences around the world. And I'm going to hand over to our technical team now and cue a video, which is a trailer for Dream, which will give you a little sense of what the performance looked like and what we were trying to achieve.
Follow me.
So I hope you can hear me and see what we were doing, but that was Dream, and that was what we performed this year. And I'm now going to talk you through this performance. Dream was, as I say, supposed to be performed in person. It was a performance that we were going to have in Stratford-upon-Avon using real-time technologies, projection mapping, similar to what you saw in The Tempest, and it was going to be using augmented reality headsets for you to see a real world and a virtual world at the same time. And we were in production for that performance, and then the pandemic hit in March and we had to completely stop production. And what that meant for us was we only that week before had recorded the orchestral music for the show, and that's all we had left, and everything else had to stop. We went into lockdown, and that meant that we couldn't do anything with our performance, and so we had to completely rethink this from its beginning. And the first thing that we did was we worked with our research partners, and we asked our research partners to reach out to audiences and ask them what they were needing right now. And in that research, what we found was three really important things. Audiences were craving togetherness, they were craving liveness, and it also highlighted a huge digital inequity in people's homes. And that digital inequity in people's homes was something that we talk about, but we really didn't know. Not everyone has access to the most cutting edge technology. Not everyone has a VR headset in their home. Very few people still have, in the UK in particular. So we needed to make something that connected to audiences accessibly, but to make it using some of the most cutting edge technology, immersive technologies that we could. And that was a huge design challenge for us. And so this performance was made to be accessed by your desktop, your mobile, or your tablet. And what we found through that is that we could still make a really ambitious piece of work that was using all the research and development expertise that we had embarked on as a consortium over the past few years. But it meant that more people could see it around the world. And it's that we need to think about when we look at global audiences, is making sure that we are making work that people can see from different backgrounds, different places around the world, because that will build the audience for the future. And that if we miss that moment and the audiences can't connect with this work, then they won't see it for them, and they won't see it for, they won't be able to hook into it. And that's a really important part for the Royal Shakespeare Company, is as we look at the future, if you are a young person at school and you are coding and programming, that theatre could be a career option for you. So the key technologies in this performance were building on the Tempest. We were using motion capture, we were using facial recognition, we were using real-time technologies, we were using the Epic Unreal Engine. We created a volume that was safe within pandemic conditions for a small acting company to be able to perform the characters in the play that were based on Shakespeare's play, with a spirit world from Shakespeare's play. And as you can see here, our movement director in rehearsal, we had a 7 metre by 7 metre volume that we could perform in, because our theatres were shut, we weren't able to open them up. So from scratch, we built a studio where we were able to perform the play in. In the background, you can see a virtual world. That world, we built a 7 kilometre by 7 kilometre forest that the world of the play was performed in. And that was a really wonderful starting point for us to imagine the stages that we were performing in physically were limited, but the stages within the virtual world that we were creating were limitless. This is Peas Blossom, one of the characters in the play. And in the play, what is happening is you effectively are performing, the story is that the world is in flux, and we wanted to get that sense of, in the pandemic, how the world was in flux. And just going to go back 1 second. I'm trying to change something here and it's not changing. How the world is in flux, and effectively the characters, there is a storm that happens, and we have to help Puck, the main character, find their way. And Puck is the narrator character all the way through, and there is a form of interactivity where audiences can help Puck find their way through the forest, and I'll show you shortly what that is. And forgive me if you can see my Zoom connection on this screen. I do not know how to get rid of it, and forgive me for that. So I hope it doesn't detract from the slides. here you can see the beautiful digital characters that we made, and the audience weren't really seeing behind the scenes, which is the live actors, although there was one scene that you could see. But Dream was this beautiful digitally rendered forest that Puck, the main character, was taking you through. And Puck had a very simple design. And the reason why Puck had a simple design, which you can see here is made up of rocks, is because the audience were asked to be fireflies, and you could experience this piece passively and just sit back and watch, or you could take the interactive version and you could become a firefly and you could help Puck find their way through the forest. And you did that by using your mobile phone or trackpad on your mouse. And there were moments in the performance where you had to emit your firefly and throw it into the forest, and it would light up Puck's way. And that's how we developed it. As you can see here, the fireflies are wrapping themselves around Puck, and that they would light up the forest, and the forest would be in darkness because we were in the forest in the night. You can also see that we were using mobile phone technology to track actors' faces, and that in it that there were different characters using different scales of character, and we were experimenting with using the motion capture technology not just as a human to human, like for like form of puppetry, but to play with scale in different ways that we could move the motion capture technology forward. And one of those characters was Cobweb, and Cobweb was tiny in the forest, caught in an acorn cup. And Puck also changed their scale according to what scenes that they were in. And here you can see Maggie, who's the performer of Cobweb, and for them performing Cobweb, the motion capture physical ways that she was performing that were hand claps, head nods, and the use of movement of her foot. And that what we were doing with the motion capture was not just seeing it as a way that we could make a bigger human or a bigger version of ourselves, but use the physicality to change how a performer can affect a digital character, and hopefully through that create a bigger sense of emotion and a greater sense of performance. Because one of the big questions for us is, in traditional performance, an actor will know how to perform out to a live audience. But if we're looking at virtual performance, we don't yet have all of those skills and crafts to know how we create an emotional connection with someone who's not with us, alongside having an actor creating an emotional connection with an audience that's with us. And that's one of the big things that we want to explore as a company, is heightening and bringing together that emotional connection more and more and more in our work, so that as a virtual audience you don't feel far away. So this was a massive experiment for us to explore with how we could be performer-led in this, and how the actor could lead the forms of emotional connection to our audiences wherever they were. And that's what we were experimenting with. The actors that we cast had huge experience in physical theatre, devising. Some had acrobatic skill sets. It's a really physical way of performing, and how we could look at the different ways that you need to express yourself physically to get the best out of your digital avatar character. And here Puck is being supported, being moved around the scene with her colleague, and you can see that actually it was a really intense mapping and blocking of the experience that we were doing. But it wasn't just about the performance itself. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, we really need to rethink how we welcome our audiences into a shared virtual space. In the same way that we constantly think about welcoming our audiences into a shared physical space. When you come to our building, how you are welcomed by the front of house team, how you know where you're sitting, you have your ticket, you often go for your drink before a show. You might meet friends at the show. These are all rituals and things that you do that are making you feel like you're going to an event. But when we think about performance online, often we just share a link and then we're watching it. But why should we do that? Let's think about making these performances events. Let's think about how we can welcome people. But there's something more profound here, that this is the big shift for us when we think about online and virtual work, is that actually we are going to people's homes. We are going into people's spaces. So it's not just about the welcome in, it's about how we can be welcoming and go into other people's spaces and be welcomed by our audiences. And that's a big shift. So audiences have more agency. We are competing for that attention more than we used to. And we also have to think about how we don't just do the same in a different space, but fundamentally think about what's important to our audiences in their home, what's important to audiences online, how we make our audiences feel special, but also if we're thinking about togetherness, if we're thinking about liveness, if we're thinking about connection, how we give space for our audiences to share how they feel. So we created a website where you could find details about the show, but in a slightly different way to what you'd normally do in our shows that we were used to doing for the live space. We needed to explain the show before it happened, though we were asking audiences to do things that we wouldn't normally ask them to do. We didn't want them to feel like they were learning that when they were in the experience. We wanted them to feel like they were they knew what they were going to do and knew what they needed to have the best performance before they experienced it. So this website allowed us to have a dialogue with audiences before the performance. And it would say, we're testing your technology. We can test your technology to see if you will experience it in the best way possible. So it allowed them to know, not have to worry about their setup during it, because we will have pre-tested that technology. It said things like, it will be best experienced if you're on your own with headphones, because we have this beautiful orchestral soundtrack that you can listen to. It's best experienced on a large screen, so you can see the gorgeous digital performances that were happening. But it also talks you through that there'd be a Q&A after, so that you could stay on and listen and speak to the actors performing in the show as if you were in the pub with them after the performance. All these different beats allowed us to create connection points with our audiences and allowed us to get closer together before the performance. And so we created this audience experience timeline that allowed us to look at the key beats of the performance and how we had that connection all the way through with our audiences in the ways that we wanted to be with them. And it also allowed us to put the audience at the heart of making this, because what we were doing was not only building a performance content, we were building our stage at the same time. So in this, we had these key beats of pre-show, onboarding, interaction, so that we explained if people wanted to interact, how they could interact. And then the narration, and then the reveal, and then at the end moment where we could sit back and be together in the bar. This was all experimenting with new ways for us to connect with our audiences and how we might build virtual platforms and virtual spaces for us to be together. And the audience response was quite overwhelming, and probably one of the most unexpected parts of the project that we did. We were very focused on making a really entertaining, wonderful 20-minute performance that people could enjoy. But really, until you connect this work with audiences, you learn so much more. What we realized is audiences want that anticipation of that live event. And when people want to be together, they want to know they're together, and liveness makes it real. To have something that's pre-recorded is not the same as that live event, and that jeopardy that you get from it and that anticipation. And that can be heightened more in a virtual way. And we can really make those aspects happen. And that one of the things that we did was we created a lobby, and it was like a holding room. It was like a front of house moment where everyone came to that lobby. And what they were doing was they were effectively doing the same as taking your coats off, getting a ticket, getting yourself ready for the performance. But they were in their homes, they were getting their own drink. They were in all the different places they could be. But in this lobby, there was a ticker at the bottom. And you'll see, if you look at some of the slides here in the bottom, audience, it told you how many people were coming to see the show. And we had so many tweets and pieces of social media going, oh my God, I'm one of 5,000 people coming to see the show. I'm so excited to be in it. That anticipation, that build-up was so important and so wonderful. And it allowed audiences to be together in that moment when we started the performance. You'll see that we had schools watching it in different places and sharing that shared experiences, that it didn't need to be a singular act. You can see here people sharing images of their own spaces, where they were, and also we had a ticker that was telling you how many minutes before the show, so people could prepare themselves, get ready, know that they weren't going to miss it, and also they were sharing that with each other. And one of the big takeaways that I want to look at in the future is, how do we enable more audiences to connect with each other when they see our work? So we're not just broadcasting to them, but they can have this as a social experience. This can be, if you come to a performance virtually on your own, you can be with people, know you're with people, and even make friends with people in that experience. All of that's really important when we think about the pandemic and we think about how disconnected we've been, and the opportunity for us to think about our stages, not just as a main stage, but as a collective stage together, wherever we are. So the benefit of collaboration and the benefit of working with different people is that we can rethink our work, not just from an RSC perspective, but we can work with practitioners that don't sound like us, don't look like us, and create content that's unexpected for our brand, unexpected for our audiences, and push the boundaries of what we're doing. And that's always what collaboration is about. All good, only good can come through collaboration. So something for us to take forward is that now homes are cultural spaces. The pandemic has absolutely identified that as a thing. We will see in the future that we will get audiences back to our stages, and we will welcome them back and be excited about welcoming them back. But the future is hybrid, the future is connected, the future is not an either or. It's not either live or either virtual. The future is all of these facets, and that how we think about that needs to be held in a really inclusive and accessible way, that we design differently. We design not based on traditions of the past, but we design for what the needs of our audiences are now. And as you can see, not only do audiences choose how they watch it, but some of our audiences created their own space to be creative and made their homes into forests. And we sent audiences small packages that they could open up at the same time, that had a dream cocktail in, that had a scent of the forest in. We are those audiences from 400 years ago, where we are immersed. We want to be part of it. We are using our wearable technology. We are thinking about candles and atmosphere. We are people that our audiences have always wanted to connect and be close to the work, whether that's a social aspect by having a drink, or whether that's turning your home into a forest, or whether that's sharing that with an online community so they know that they're part of something. These are all interesting components of a future world that's connected, and how we find connection in a time when we've been profoundly disconnected is really important for us to think about as we make our theatre for the future. That you can be wherever you are in the world, you can have a connection with the RSC, and that you can have a connection with us on your terms with us and be with us and not feel far away is a really important component of any theatre company, but also any arts community going forward. So I wanted to sort of take a pause now and to reflect on the fact that we've talked about 2 projects here that the RSC have delivered that are wide-ranging, large-scale pieces looking at ambitious collaborations with technology partners that haven't come into the world of theatre before, and that the premise of the work that I do at the RSC is never to do it alone. We always work in collaboration because collaboration allows us to share the skills of what we're good at, but also ask questions about the future and invite people in to help us explore that future. And that one of the great things about the RSC is that we make all our work ourselves. We have an armory, we make swords, we have a costume department, we have a fantastic production team, all of which are crafting theatre every day and thinking about how we make that. But also when we examine how we want to look at new tools and technologies, that how we look at the best people and the expertise coming in to do that. As I said before, the theatre making toolkit is expanding, and it means that the skills of which you make theatre is expanding. And that if we can look at young people coming through thinking about a career, and that they have access to this knowledge around real-time game engine technology or coding and programming, and that they don't think about it as it just being a games industry or a technology sector career, that actually the arts sector has something for those people that could possibly be more experimental or more creative. We have something to offer a new generation of skills, and that to build that organically is really important, that we don't lose that cultural memory of what a theatre company is, and we build on that rather than feel that as very far away. And partnership and collaboration can do that. But there's 4 key principles around partnership and collaboration that I wanted to share with you that are really important. And when we're looking at traditional systems, if we're looking, in my world, we're looking at the new systems, we're often questioning traditional systems, not challenging them, but questioning them. And also what we're doing is we're not just building the content, but we need to build so many things around that, either the ritual or the stages and the infrastructure, that we need to look at the models for making this work differently. And the models for making this work differently, I believe, have 4 key takeaways that I want to share with you today. And these are 4 key principles of how we work in the digital space at the RSC. Is you put people first and you celebrate and recognise expertise, so that in all the facets of collaboration, that people know why they're there and their skill set, but they're also comfortable knowing that they don't need to answer everything. That if we have a technology partner that can say to us that we can now have enough processing power to render a digital avatar in real time, we will listen and we will work with them to understand that. Because as a beautiful quote that was given to me is that the artists need to become engineers and the engineers need to become artists, and recognizing that expertise, that we need both, is a really important principle of how we work at the RSC. And also, if we are looking at new forms of theatre, if we are looking at the future, we will need to shift our culture to accept the risk of what that means. And at points, flatten the hierarchy for us to be able to have space to play. And that space to play is not a luxury. That space to play is a considered examination of research and development for us to test, whether that's with an actor and them testing how they perform in the context of a virtual world, which isn't film and it isn't the theatre in its traditional sense and is new. They will need time to examine that and go deep into the thinking around that. And that in order for that space to time and play, we need the people and the teams around that to make that happen. And that what we're always thinking about is how we can be a hub to develop the transformational leaders of the future, to give them a mandate to help build their enthusiasm across partnership and unlock their expertise, but also for them to do their work elsewhere, for us to build the people with the skills and the rigor and the expertise for them to do it elsewhere. So the RSC isn't the only company, but it's always looking at its leadership role to share and build skills that can be used across the theatre making community, so that we're not just building work on our own, but many people are building this work. And finally, a really important beat, which is that you have to measure this innovation as well as any financial return. And the commercialization of this is really important if we are to look at it sustainably. The few facts that I want to leave you on for Dream were that in those, we had 10 performances of Dream. And in that week of 10 performances, 65,000 audience members attended that performance. We generally have 1,000 people attend a performance a night in our main stages, in our physical stages. We had 65,000 people in one night, in 10 performances. Of that, we reached 92 countries. That's 92 countries around the world that were connected with this performance, that could access our work. Of that, 76% of those 65,000 audience members were new to the RSC. New attenders to the RSC because we were doing something different. We thought about how we connected with those audiences, and that we thought about making that work differently and how they could connect with it. And that with those 92 countries, we weren't just looking at UK speaking, because we created a performance that wasn't about the text in its traditional spoken form. We were world building and creating a world that people could come into that wasn't necessarily based on language. But of those 65,000 audience attenders, 40% were Generation Y and Generation Z. And for us, those younger audiences that can connect with us, because we're thinking about our work for that generation, is super exciting. And if we can create a connection, intergenerational connection, at a time when there is mass polarization between the generations or society in general, and you can experience this work as a family or experience this work at different age groups and have conversation about it, we can genuinely look at the commercialization and the growth of that. But commercialization and financial return does not always happen at the first entry point around research and development. It takes time to build, but the research and development gives us time to build the data and the evidence to make really confident decisions in the future. It allows us to bring ourselves forward and think about relevance, think about popularism, think about holding space, and it allows us to connect with a new generation coming through, but hold true to the values of what the promise of theatre is. And in that time, to be able to do that with our audiences and not separate to, is completely fundamental to how theatre, the future of theatre, can evolve and how we can delight and inspire our audiences. And one final note, when we performed The Tempest, we had a similar thing happen. And in that, our older audiences, our traditional audiences, went in with the Shakespeare, and out, when they came out of the performance, they came out with the delight of the technology. But when you ask some of our younger audiences what their most favourite scene in the Tempest production was, they most likely say the drinking scenes between Stefano and Trinculo. There's no technology in that scene. It's just two actors being funny about drinking and being silly. And in it, we were able to bring young audiences in through the technology and out with the wonder of Shakespeare. And it's that convergence and that connection that I think is hugely beneficial for us to think about going forward, about how we bring that together and what the new meeting points for culture is. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your passionate, enthusiastic, insightful 60-minute lecture. Thank you very much, Sarah Ellis. So what came to my mind is that was dream of RSC. I was one of the 65,000 people. I'm honored to be one of them. And at that time, from the waiting time before the performance, I could feel that the design is very detailed. And after the performance, I shared my space and I posted on my social media account too. So, like Sarah mentioned, at first I was really excited about the technology itself, but in the performance, I could feel that I'm with all the people around the world. That's what I felt, and it was really amazing experience for me. And during the entire performance, I wonder how RSC could really execute this kind of project. I wondered about that, and today, listening to lecture, I could find out what you did and how you did it. So today you talked about Dream and Tempest of RSC, and you mentioned all the details about your project. And I think it gave lots of insights to the people who are working in the performance industry. So for the next 20 to 30 years, I'm going to ask a few more additional questions. So now there are some audience who are watching this show real time. So I'm going to take one question from them. So he's one of the person who participate in the PAMS salon and is working in the performance industry. So now you're making new attempts. So and there should be some support for the technology. So how it is being done, the support from the organization. And I think it took more than 2 years to develop the project. So what's the actual time period that you took to develop this project? And the financial return. Of course, you mentioned about the financial return, but before you had the financial return, actually it was R&D project. So maybe you had some pressure to make it a break-even project or any budget, the scale of the budget that you had to spend. So I want to ask you about the scale of the budgets. So this is a question from the person who is actually working in the performance industry.
Yeah, so I should be really clear that this was a funded project, Audience of the Future, and it was specifically to research and develop multiple ways we could test the future of live performance using immersive technology. So it wasn't like a project that we decided to do and would look for a commercial return. It was specifically not to create a commercial return, but actually look at the research and development for the future commercial models. So it is slightly different, but that's a huge privilege for us in the UK because it was a fund from the UK government to do that. And I think that those funds are incredibly important for us because it allows us to take risk and push through to the future business model. Because often when we're looking at the future, it's speculative and very hard to define quite radical shifts in business models that will give you a return so quickly. And our purpose, we are a charity, so we have lots of different motivators around our role in society and also looking at ourselves commercially. So that particular project, its purpose was to test that, and in testing that, we identified consumer demand. We've identified the costs around making it, and also we've tested, I think, ways we can make it to allow us to be more efficient on how we'd make it in the future. It's important to say that the project was over 2 to 3 years, but due to the pandemic and the shift that we made, Dream was made in effectively 4 or 5 months. So it's the principles were making it over 2 to 3 years, and the reality of the pandemic and the profound change we had to make to an online audience meant that making it in a very short amount of time. But I would say that actually enabled us to be really fleet of foot and agile in ways that we hadn't thought about. So I think that an open-mindedness in R&D to know that the answer you thought you were going to get to at the beginning of a process and where you end up can be different at sometimes. But the commercial return at the moment is still the difficult thing to crack, and we've still got a lot more work to do on the efficiency of that.
Thank you for your answer. So many people are interested in your presentation. There was a second question, one more question for you. So audience is not going to the theater, but theater is approaching the audience. I found it very interesting. So based on the deep understanding of arts, I think that should come first before we utilize the technology in making our performances. So are you interested in any other new technology? Are you planning to have such kind of project in the future?
Yeah, I'm really interested. That's a really good question. So I'm really interested in how you bring the live and the virtual much more closely together, because at the moment you're either in this space behind me or you're in your home, and I really want to look at making that connect more. And it's not for every performance, don't get me wrong, but I'm really curious about how the actor holds both spaces and how the actor can perform in both those spaces in real time. And I'm also really curious from audiences to know more about what makes them love being in this space and what makes them love being in their own space, and how we can develop those key principles more. And I do think that comes back to ritual. I really do. I think that, you know, there are moments where I want to be in this sort of space and I get a buzz from it and completely immersed and completely focused in ways, you know, that you cannot replicate that. I think that in the digital space previous to now, it's felt like a competition between digital taking over, you know, us being connected together live. And I just don't think that's right or true. We are just coexisting. We are in a world where we can have both, but neither should compete. Both should see it as an opportunity to make more of the event. So in some ways, like events like these are super live. And always think about what it can do that nothing else can do. So what is the promise of being in a room with people together in person? What can that do that nothing else can replicate? We're not, it's like innovation, we're not building a faster horse here. We're innovating to imagine the tools or the things that make us human and make us want to connect. So that's what I'm excited about. I'm excited about bringing that together. I'm excited about technology that might be invisible, technology that we don't know about, that highlights and brings up the more human aspect of our togetherness. I'm interested in how we use 5G technology, for example, to make our connections more varied, more creative, more meaningful, that we don't have these delays on our connection points. So I'm really interested in those areas. I'm interested in making what we're experiencing now better and more magical and more entertaining.
So we have really high expectations for your next project. So you have such continuous curiosity over these projects.
Thank you.
First one, can you elaborate more about transformational leaders? What kinds of skills such as attitude, behavior, and technical skills? And there is another question too. Also, if you point out one thing not to in partnership and collaboration, what will be?
Oh, could you repeat the question? I couldn't quite hear it. Would you mind repeating it? I'm so sorry.
Okay. So first one, can you elaborate about more about transformational leaders? What kinds of skill, such as attitudes, behavior, technical skills, and also if you point out one thing not do in partnership and collaboration, what will be?
Okay, so developing transformational leaders, I mean, that's exciting because what you're doing is you're creating the conditions and the environment and the culture for people to really thrive. And I believe in that quite strongly. And I also believe that many of the people I work with move on to be leaders. And that's a really important facet of my work. And to become a transformational leader, you don't need to know everything. You don't need to know all the coding. You don't need to know, all the different specific aspects. What you do need to know is what you don't know, and always employ people that are better than you. That is a fundamental principle of leadership. And I think that what you do need to know is about people and their motivation and why they're doing something. And that transformational leadership is also thinking about the teams that you're bringing in, and that you may have the best person and the best coder, but can that best coder then translate someone else's vision or think about something as a team? And the thing about theatre, which as an art form is probably similar in film, but not other art forms necessarily, is a team of people that make theatre. No one person makes a piece of theatre. So in the leadership aspect of this, we really need to think about that. And then if we're looking at partnership and collaboration, work with partners where you can come together around one shared question that you can explore together. Often partnership and collaboration fails because they have different motivations or are looking at different things, and actually you have to come around one shared question or vision that you're all working towards.
네, 너무나 중요.
There was a really important point to bring about. So when we engage in a new project, what do we look for? What do we seek? There should be a direction that is agreed upon. Also, it's not like we have to become engineers. We just understand their expertise. We have enough communication. And that was really important thing to note. Most of all, in your presentation, you mentioned that we should ask, not challenge. So we're not supposed to just learn coding. We just need to understand their language. Thank you. We have more questions. There was something impressive Sarah mentioned about it. It was about the pre-survey about audience to understand their needs. And even after the show, there were like 100 questions, right? There were like 100 questions even after the performance, and those seem to be highly in details. So I think it could be about future audience and success of performance. It seems that you are considering the audience of the future and how the performance went as well. My question is, was it effective? Was the survey effective? What were the implications from the survey?
Yeah,
So
it was a really
survey, and
yeah, it was a really long survey and not what we'd normally do, but because it was research and development, and everyone who filled that in, thank you so much. What the survey did, what that audience insight did, was allowed us to take a beat to genuinely ask audiences what they thought. And that insight and all of those responses are data and evidence that we can use to validate how that research and development went down, but also we can take that forward into our next work to see how important certain elements are to audiences, so we can dial it up should that be the case. And also for some bits to go, that's not so important from an audience perspective. Audiences don't often get asked what they think in that level of detail in that way. They don't. And I think that's important to say that that you have to be quite genuine about asking those questions. And some of the audience insight that we gathered was, the anticipation and the bringing people into the performance was incredibly important. But things like duration, an audience virtually isn't necessarily going to want to sit in a theatre like this and have a 3-hour play performance. So we learned that smaller, shorter content actually works really well in this space. And you could have, you know, a series of shorter content throughout an evening, for example, but with gaps in between. It's all of that sort of data and evidence that's really important to us, because that then influences how we commission the work, how we work with creative to make that work, and how we look at storytelling, for example. Did some of the storytelling beats land in this performance? Was that helpful? How important was the visual identity in this? They're all insights that help us factor in future work. It's so those are the sorts of things we were asking, and particularly when you're making work and thinking about the future, it allows us to be more confident, take more risk, but also just hear from an audience what matters to them, so we can make their experience the best as possible going forward.
Listening to the audience, connecting more with the audience, and that requires open mindset. It's almost touching to think about this concept. And next mobility is one of the key themes at this year's PAMS. We're thinking about new type of mobility. So I'm in Seoul, and I was able to enjoy performance of RSC, and I think it involves mobility. And as people join online at the same time to see the same performance, it seems that we're not confined within locality anymore. And we want to hear your thought on this topic as well. Next mobility and digital mobility. What do you think they mean in performing arts sector?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We didn't do enough on Dream, and I think we've got a lot further to go. But you know, you will have been able to watch it in Seoul because we programmed a performance that wasn't at 8 o'clock on a UK time, that we performed a 2 a.m. performance that was much probably more accessible to you in your region, and watching it at a time when you weren't watching it in the middle of the night. And also the time of day that you watch an experience does change your mood as to how you engage with it and how far away you feel. So for example, watching something at 10 a.m. local time that's meant for audiences in the evening will make you feel further away. So the scheduling is really important. We schedule the performances globally, and we think about that. That's important. But then we have to also then address the traditional cultural biases of access, and that we often design for an ableist approach. And what I mean by that is someone that can hear well, doesn't have any visual impairment, that doesn't have any access needs. And then what happens is we design things on top of that makes it easier for someone to experience the performance. So we have things like audio description if you require that, or subtitles if you're hard of hearing, that allow you to experience the play according to your needs. But what would happen if we made our work inclusive and accessible from its very point of origination, and that we didn't need to add those additional things on to the performance, but we thought about that. And so one of the things I think is interesting there is, well, why don't we use motion capture as a form of sign language that's much more integrated? We have done that on our main stage shows. Why don't we think about that more integratedly? So that's where I think we have potential in the virtual space to look at design from the beginning. But currently, we're not thinking about that, and the technology sector certainly isn't thinking about that enough. But the arts and culture sector, I think, is further ahead and can do that. So, for example, you don't get any data analytics on how many people accessed the audio described version of a performance. If we know that, if we have that data, we can do something about it. So we need to make those fundamental changes, and I see this as an opportunity to do that. But we also need to work with the experts that have been working in this space for a long time, and those that really understand, and the community that we are engaging with, that have been cut out of a lot of work because they haven't been thought about in its design.
Thank you very much.
Question from audience. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? There's another question from audience. I totally agree about interactive with audiences in working with technology. In terms of meaning of interactive with audiences, what might be the interactive in technology, which is different from the one in physical interactiveness? Did you?
Oh, could you repeat the question? Sorry.
Okay. I totally agree about interactive with audiences in working with technology. In terms of meaning of interactive with audiences, what might be the interactive in technology which is different from the one in physical interactiveness?
Yeah, got it. Sorry. So in the virtual world, interactivity in your home means that you have a mouse or you have your phone, and what we did with Dream is we weren't just broadcasting out to you. We could receive data and information from the people experiencing the performance. So if at a certain point you wanted to be a firefly, you'd be able to, a screen would appear and you'd be able to throw your firefly into the experience, and that would show up in the virtual space and you would see that. In Shakespeare's day, people articulated and were shouting and talking through performances or making it really known how they felt about the performance. So actually, fundamentally, they aren't that different. But in the spaces that we occupy now, often we are asked to turn off our mobile phone, the lights go out, we're asked to be really quiet. And the cultural behavior when we experience something in these spaces is much more refined than it may have necessarily been a long time ago. But when we think about virtual connection, yes, we can have an audience that might be able to change the outcome of a performance if we want to do that. But they're not that dissimilar. If you look at Punchdrunk's work and you look at the agency you have as an audience going into that space and being able to explore that space, it's not that dissimilar. So I'd argue again, we have ways that we have agency at home or virtually, and we can connect, but actually we also have those agencies in the live space. We just choose not to do them, or we choose to do them. So it's a matter of choices, really. But what we do have that we didn't have before is that we are able to connect virtually, and the interaction is getting better and better and better all the time according to the technology. But what we don't want to do is the technology to lead that. We want to lead the technology and get the technology to do the things that we'd like it to do.
Thank you very much. We do have one more question. So it's about Dream. Regarding interaction, there was ticket price difference, right?
Yes.
So it's a new model of tickets in a way. And the people were willing to pay for it. What do you think are implications for that? And what do you think it means for experiment of distribution? It's about pricing. Like, how can we determine pricing with this information?
No, that's right. So we had one of the things of the research and development was to test the commerciality and the pricing of the performance. And it was a really important test for us. And what we realized, we were testing the pricing point, so how much people were prepared to pay for an added experience, and the interactivity having a value. What's quite interesting is that we downplayed the passive experience, and actually people got huge amounts for it and would have paid a similar amount for that they were paying for the interactive. So I think people were quite happy paying £10, if you know what I mean, for that sort of experience, which allows us to then think about, well, if that's the income we can get from it, and those are the audiences that we can get, then we can look at the budgeting for the production of it in the future and what sort of budgets we should be giving this work to be made. but we did, there was a slight increase in ticket price for the interactive that people were prepared to pay for, but they do have a greater sense of return on that. It's quite interesting. As soon as you feel that you're participating in something interactive, then you feel you have an emphasis on more, and there are quite high perceptions of what interactive means. Whereas if you just sold it as a general experience with an element of that, you could probably sell it as a nice ticket price. It's all about the expectations of the experience, and what interactive means to an audience member can vary. But I would say we can be quite confident that we could sell the passive tickets in the future at a decent price, and people would feel that they'd had a really, really nice experience for that cost.
Thank you very much. We prepared many questions, and we also got some questions real time from the audience. So this made the session very fruitful. So my last question: RSC is the representative UK theater company with long history, so you might have lots of opportunity to get funded, and you are in a good environment to do the R&D project. But for the audience who are watching this show, very small size art institutions and small like individual artists, so what should they do? Like they might face some challenges in utilizing the technology. So in the initial stage, what can they try with the technology to make some active experiment with the technology? What do they need to do that? And now there's the big change in the era. So what kind of competency and skills do the artists and art institutions should be equipped with to do that?
Oh, I completely agree. It's a really big challenge, and I absolutely recognize the privilege of which I'm working and the company of which I'm working and what that brings. So we feel really strongly about sharing the learnings. So we're launching a website next week that will share all of the learnings from the R&D. It will talk to you about new skills. It will share all the design schematics and the organizational structures of which we use to make this work. It will share with you the mistakes as well. It will share with you our learnings of what we think we need to make turning this going forward. That is one way that we can do that smaller organizations can look at all of that material and see what works for them and what might not work for them without the level of risk involved that we've experienced. Also, it will have people on there with the expertise that you might want to work with in the future and what those roles are. I also think that it's really important that where we can, we share resource, whether that's kit and technology. And also that, it's an evolving situation, but I feel very strongly that we share as much as we can of the insights and the learnings, in particular of this work, more broadly to people that wouldn't have been able to do that themselves, so that they make better decisions. And then the other thing is that we need to make this work successful, because if by making this work successful, then it does mean organizations that don't have the resource we do will be more likely to be funded, because we've seen this as a case study in order for that to be supporting evidence for this work happening more broadly across the sector. And we're experimenting with things like fellowships and stuff like that connect with people that we wouldn't ordinarily work with. But yeah, I absolutely recognize the challenge there for organizations that do not have this privilege or haven't been able to connect in that way. And so even events like this and conferences like this are important parts of that connection and building that community. And as I say, there's nothing proprietary about the knowledge that we have, and that we need to share that, and also broker connections with other partners, if you know what I mean, that can help future collaborations on the scale of which they need to be for others too.
So we'll listen to Sarah Ellis' presentation and insights to the attitude to be open-minded and to share, and I think she gave much implications for all of us. So when we are planning and making and preparing for some performances, we sometimes face some challenges that we find like having some difficulties to communicate with others. And it'll be really a good opportunity to be shared with the experiences of failure and communication and mistakes that you had. So even after the pandemic, even if we are faced with another challenge, it'll motivate us to continue our work in the art area. So for 1 hour and a half today, we listened to the deep talks of Sarah Ellis, and we had lots of learnings from her. So thank you very much, Sarah Ellis, for your time. And this concludes our session today. Thank you for listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Everything changes.